Okay, so today is lesson 12. Just getting my stream started. And so as I mentioned, your lesson 11 quiz is on Blackboard now. So there's no password on it. You have until midnight tonight to complete it. So the other things, assignment 2, part 3 is due next Wednesday at 5 o'clock. I'm also going to give you a short lab today. I would encourage you to do the lab basically as soon as we're done the lesson, because it should not take you any longer than 5 or 10 minutes. So I'll give you until next week to do it, but easy thing is just go through and do it quickly. It's really simple. It's mostly a copy and paste exercise, to be honest. So it won't take long. Okay, so I just got an email from Ken saying he won't be able to join us today. That's okay. So if you have questions, then yeah, please just use the chat. And I'll keep checking that. Actually, just bear with me for a minute. I'm going to try to break the chat out a little bit over on my other screen. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today are APIs. Does anybody have an idea before I introduce them? What the heck is an API? Have you seen them before? Do you know what that term means? What do we already know about APIs? So you can turn on your mic or you can put something. Okay, yeah, so that's a really good example, Justin. Like a Google login, that would be an example of an API. We'll actually, I'll kind of do a brief introduction. So the slides that we're going to have a look through, they're here, the lesson 12 slides on Blackboard. So the name API is actually a really old name. It doesn't really describe what APIs do anymore, but I'll explain where the name comes from. In the simplest terms, an API is a way for two different programs to talk together. And we use APIs all the time, as you might see in this diagram, because we build applications, but often our applications need to communicate with other applications. And doing something like, as Justin said, a Google login, it allows us to really easily extend the functionality of our application by basically consuming or using this API that Google has made available to us. So let's think about, applications we use every day, a huge number of them use APIs. So something like a Google login, which Justin mentioned. Google also makes other APIs available to us, things like Google Search. We can embed it and include it in our site. Something like a Google Map, YouTube, those are all APIs that Google makes available to us that we can include in our application. Google's not the only provider. We're actually going to work in your lab. You're going to work with Facebook's API. Some other examples would be things like a credit card authorization service on an e-commerce site. We're not going to write the code ourselves to actually check credit cards. Thank you, Hung. No, I'm not sharing my screen. I apologize. Okay. My apologies. Now you can see it, I would hope. Okay, sorry about that. Let's move a few things around. So looking at use cases, so something like sending credit card payments off. We're not going to authorize cards ourselves. We're going to send that to a credit card authorization company through their API. We don't actually take the users to a different site. We just send the API, the credit card details, and we get a response back telling us whether the attempted purchase is okay or not. Yep, embedding a YouTube video, that is an API. That's a good question. It's a bit of a simpler way of doing it, but again, we're taking functionality that lives in another application and we're embedding or including it in our own. So yes, a YouTube video or a Google map would still be an example of an API. Many times when we're working with data, we want to be able to draw charts or graphs. So there are services out there where we can send our data and say what kind to a graphing or a charting service that say what kind of graph we want, and the service will send us back an image that we can render in our application. And then a lot of other APIs have to do with showing data in real time. So things like the weather, well, we're going to work with that today, or when we're getting, data streams that are being updated in real time. So something like a stock ticker or a news feed. So we may want to show this information on a site we're building, but we don't own the information. We just want to access it from some kind of third-party service that makes it available to us through an API. Morning, Walt. So the name is actually a really old name. The name API doesn't really make sense anymore. But this little screenshot, this is a quick video, and this kind of talks, this is a good video. I've linked to it. It's in the lesson 12 folder as well, like maybe 3-4 minutes by a developer explaining where APIs came from. So APIs actually came in the early 90s when Microsoft created Windows. So the idea was Microsoft was going to create a bunch of small functions or programs that would perform a task in Windows. So something like saving a file or sending a file to the printer to be printed. So the Windows team had the idea that anybody who wrote an application, like let's say Microsoft Word or Notepad or Paint, or any other program that people could develop to run on Windows, rather than those developers having to create their own save or print features, they could simply call those methods in the operating system, and the operating system would know what to do to save a file, to print, etc. So you can see from the diagram here, Windows here, and these little boxes represent the API, the Windows APIs that were available to all of the programs that might get installed onto Windows. So the name API came from there, and it really just expanded to become a kind of an interface so two different programs could communicate. So we still use the term API, even though the original context of how it was used is kind of gone. Now, we especially see APIs when we're working in large organizations. And there's a couple of reasons. First of all, because there's a lot of sharing of information that needs to go on between different applications in a big organization. And if you think about what we see as an end user, what looks like one application is actually typically a whole series of different software and components. And the things that allow them to work together are the APIs. So it's really important, if we're going to be professional developers, we need to know how do we work with APIs that were developed by other developers so we can extend our applications and talk to them. We also may need to share data from our own applications. So we may have to build our own APIs that other applications can talk to. And we're going to do both of those things today. This is what it looks like. So actually, I showed this slide. We had a guest talk in my semester 4 Project Studio class. You guys are going to see this slide again next year. And our guest speaker is an old friend of mine who's an IT project manager. And a few years ago, he oversaw the redevelopment of the web and mobile banking application for one of the major Canadian banks. So this is actually the architecture. So, here's the website, the web application for the bank, the mobile app, third-party apps like, let's say, Interact that could interact with it. And here are all of the different pieces of the banking system. Now, all we see as the end user is either the website or the mobile application, but all of these are different components, some of which were built by the bank themselves, and some of these are third-party software tools. And everywhere you see lines connecting these applications, these lines represent APIs, because these are separate programs that need to be able to communicate. So for example, their main banking service, this ESB, had to be able to talk to their bill payment system. But these are actually separate programs. As the end customer, we don't see that these are all separate programs, but that's how they are. They're actually, so bill payment is a completely separate application from, let's say, the credit. But as a user, I need to be able to access both my credit cards, loans, and mortgages, as well as accessing my bill payments all through a single application. So if you're going to work in a large organization, in finance, in government, in a big company, a lot of what you're going to do as a developer is working with these APIs that enable the different pieces of a large program to talk to one another. Now, one of the other things that happens in something like this is it can be tricky for applications. So maybe, our bill payment is written in Java. It's got to talk to this, which is written in maybe C#, and maybe our website is actually using Node.js and our iPhone app is using Swift. So we could have all these different components. They're built in different languages. How do they share data, and how do they talk together? So what we have is we have to have some kind of standard format when data is moving back and forth. We've got to have it in some kind of format that every program can identify and understand, regardless of what language that program is coded in. So originally, the original language was XML. So XML sort of looks like HTML markup, every value. So here we've got a person with the name of John. No, JSON is often used in Ajax. Walt, yes. Ajax used to use XML, which is what the X stands for in Ajax, but now most Ajax services will use JSON. So in XML, you can see we have opening and closing tags around each value, and this used to be the standard. There are still some APIs that are available in XML, but mostly we use JSON now, so JavaScript object notation. And there's a couple of reasons why JSON has become more popular. Number one, there are fewer characters. So for example, here for the first name, in XML, we have an opening first name and a closing first name tag. In JSON, we only have first name printed once. So in a really long file, the JSON file is going to be shorter than a corresponding XML file. And that means it'll transmit faster and use less server bandwidth. It's also easier to read without all the tags and because of the spacing and nesting in JSON. Now, occasionally we'll find APIs. Actually, I'll go and we'll pull up an example of one. We'll go and have a look at the Canada Post API. So, if we're going to build a web application and it includes people being able to order things and ship it, we might want to call the Canada Post API to get a shipping cost so that we know how much to charge the user on checkout. We don't want to take them to the Canada Post site. We're just going to use Canada Post's service so we can do a lookup behind the scenes. And the way that Canada Post API works, this has been around for a long time, is Canada Post actually has two versions. So we can actually, Canada Post accepts both formats. The original format was XML. They haven't taken that offline. So when you're going to do a shipping lookup with Canada Post, you can say, I want to use XML or I want to use JSON. But most APIs nowadays, they're only going to use JSON. And that's what we'll use. Okay, that link is broken. So the whole idea is, it doesn't matter the two applications that want to talk to each other. It doesn't matter if they're using different technologies. So maybe let's say we have an iPhone app, and usually we'll build iPhone apps. The native language is Swift, but maybe we want to give users the ability to use their Microsoft login. So let's say, Blackboard has an app. If you're an iPhone user, you can install it, but you can log in using your Microsoft login. So that Microsoft login program, it's written in C#. The The actual app is written in Swift, but they're going to exchange those messages in JSON. So it doesn't matter because both applications can speak JSON. Is it, Justin, reading your question, is it the same as linking in Bootstrap? A little bit, but it's more complex than that. I mean, it's the same in the sense that we are adding third-party functionality. So functionality that, or code that somebody else wrote, we're including it to improve our own application. In that sense, yes. But CSS is generally static. We're not sharing data or moving data back and forth like we would in, let's say, something like a weather API or a login where we're actually transmitting data. Well, again, yes, it's like adding a JS file, but same as adding CSS. It's similar in that way that we are extending functionality, but we're not actually moving data when we add a CSS or JavaScript file. Okay. So we're going to play around with some simple APIs. So what we're going to do today is we're going to open up our music library and we're going to first we're going to add 2 new APIs into our site to increase the functionality of it. And then we're going to build an API of our own, which could be consumed by another application. So I'm going to open up my music library. I'm going to connect to the VPN. I'm going to make sure my web server's started. My server's already started. And these are really good questions you guys are asking. So I'd encourage you to keep asking through today's class. So I'm going to open up my music library. Another resource that I did put on here for you on Blackboard. This is just a quick tutorial about some API basics. I'm not going to go through it, but this is here for you as an additional resource, this Zapier's API tutorials. Okay, so the slides I just went through are here, and the little video where I had a screenshot of what is an API, that's this 6-minute video, that's linked here as well. So I'll make sure my site is loading. So the first API I want to use today is I want to use an API from the weather network. So we want on our site, actually I want to fix up our footer. I've had it floating up here. I want to anchor my footer down to the bottom. And then we want to add in the little bottom right-hand corner, we want to add, using the Weather Network's API, a little weather widget. So it will show us the current weather for any city we set it to. So I'm actually going to close up all my files for now. I'll close everything. And I'm going to open up my footer. So I think the first thing I want to do is actually fix the CSS here. I want to anchor my footer down to the bottom of the page. And then we're going to use the Weather Network's API. So the Weather Network is happy to let us use their service so that we can show the current weather in any application we have. And it's pretty simple. It's mostly copy and paste. And I'm just going to show you what the footer should look like. This is from my other, fix this up in my Friday class. But I want footer, whoops. I want my footer to be anchored down at the bottom here like this. So I'm just going to make a couple changes. So in my footer, I'm going to change some of the classes here to anchor it at the bottom. Actually going to give it an ID, with sticky footer. And I'm going to change the class to py4. And then I think I'll need to go to the CSS and define this sticky footer class. Just see what that does so far. Probably nothing without us changing the CSS. Oh, I do want to keep the BG footer and font small. Try that. CSS is always trial and error for me. Okay. So I'm going to add the py4, and then I'm going to need to go and define this sticky footer class. And as well, I think we're going to need to set the body height to 100%. And we want the main, we're going to have to set the flex on the main. So you go to styles. So I'm going to add a couple things here. So define our sticky footer. We're going to set the flex shrink to 0. I also need to define for the HTML and body tags, I'm going to set height equal to 100%. We'll see how that looks. I think we're going to need to add one more class, but I'll have a look at this and see how it comes out. Yep, so it's still not pushed to the bottom. So we're going to define one more class. I'll create a page content. This will be for the middle section. And then we'll create a main tag inside our body. Well, you may be right. I may have to play around with it just a little bit. I'm going to try it like this, but so in my footer, before my footer, I'm going to close a main tag and I'm going to open a main tag with this class of page content. Sorry, with the ID of page content at the top. So in my header, and I'll take out that closing main. We'll see what that does for us, if anything. Yeah, there is a conflict, you're right, but it should, okay, I've got to add a couple more classes, I believe. I think in my header I need, in the body, I'll need the flex and flex content. Oh, no, I don't have another main element. I just have the one, Justin. I think the class, I need to use a couple of bootstrap classes here. Okay, so that anchors it to the bottom. So let me review the changes. So I've added the main tag below the body, and I've given this class an ID. So for the body class, I've used deflex and flex column. And for my ID for the main section, which is opened in the header but closed before the footer, I've used this page content class. So in header, line 13 is modified and line 14 is new. And then I'll show the CSS and the footer. If yours doesn't anchor to the bottom right now, it's not that big of a deal. I just figured if I'm going to change the footer, I may as well clean it up anyway. So I added these 3 lines to the CSS. And then I'll go back to the footer in a moment. Trying new headphones, they really don't want to stay in my ears today. So I'm sorry if I'm cutting in and out a little bit. I hope the audio is okay. If it's not, please let me know. So now in my footer, I've added the, yep, I will in just one sec, Justin. I've closed the main, and then I've made some modifications to the footer ID and class. I'm going to come back to the footer anyway because we're going to add the API in here. So here's the lines 13 and 14 are the changes in the header. Okay, thanks, Justin. Correct. I'm closing the main here after all the content on the page. So this isn't the only way to do it. So Justin, that's a good suggestion you posted in the chat. Entirely up to you how you want to do the CSS. There's certainly not only one right way to do it. And maybe I haven't done it in the most efficient way. That's certainly possible. So now what I want to do is I want to add a little weather widget over here using the Weather Networks API. And this should actually be fairly simple to do. So in Blackboard, there's a link here to the Weather Network widget. So I'm going to open that up and we can have a look at it. So this is exactly what we want to do. We want to add the weather to our site by creating a custom widget so visitors can see up-to-date local conditions. We can pick the size, up to 6 different locations, and we can customize it. So this is the default one of what it will look like. Now, why do you suppose, why would they make this available to us? So why would they give us code that we could put in our application for free? Like, what's in it for the weather network? Feel free to, you can turn on your mic to answer if you have a thought. Yeah, exposure, right. Yeah, advertising, right? It's going to be, yeah, it's going to drive traffic to their site as well. That's absolutely right. So, you know, we see things like this with Google Login, Google Search. You know, that's the trade-off, that we're borrowing functionality from these services, but in effect, we're also advertising for these services. So I'm going to scroll down here. I don't want this default kind of square widget because it's not going to fit very well in the footer. I think I want this one. I want one that's long. No, I think that's just an ad. Justin, the allergy tip is just an advertisement. So then we can put in the weather for any location. So I may as well pick Barrie. You can show the weather from anywhere in the world if you like. You know, if you're from a different country, you know, put in the weather from your home city, wherever you're from. So I'm going to pick Barrie. So you have the ability to customize a little bit. You know, what color do you want the background to be? What color do you want the font? What font style do you want? You know, maybe I'll pick something else. And we can put in our own hexadecimal values here. So you can customize this. I'll leave it as Celsius. You don't need to put in your email address. You only have to agree to the terms of use. So again, you can customize this and you can come back and you can change it however you like. So I'll click on accept. And it says, okay, copy this code and this is what it's going to look like. Cool. So if we look at the code for a second, it creates a div tag. There's a link. So yeah, it says the weather network here. And Rebecca, you mentioned, or Justin, you said advertising, right? So not only is it the ad, but it's a link. So it will drive traffic to their site. And then it uses JavaScript to make a JavaScript call to this URL on the weather network's domain. And it will pass in, so every location, so this is Barrie, every location, it passes in a code, and that JavaScript is going to generate this output. So I'm going to copy that whole thing. Copy all the code. And then we'll go back to our footer. Now, let's see. We've got it in here. We'll paste it. I'm going to paste it in here, and then we're probably going to have to do a little more formatting. But I'm just going to paste all that code in. To get the code, go to the Weather Network widget, link on Blackboard. You fill out the form. So you customize your button. You pick the size and orientation. Page is loading very slowly, so you just fill out this form. Pick a size, put in a location, and agree to the terms of use, and then it will give you the code. So I've just copied it and pasted it in right after the copyright statement. So I want it to appear on the right side of my footer. We're probably going to have to wrap this a little bit in with Bootstrap to get it in the right place. But let's just see how it looks so far. So now if I refresh, Okay, well, it actually shows up right here underneath. And it's got this link directly to the weather network. I don't want this link here. I'm going to remove this. I'm probably okay to leave it down here, but this is strange. It should be showing, it's showing me the right temperature, but it's not actually showing me Barrie. I think this may have to do with the font. I got to make a couple changes. I may need to regenerate it. First of all, here, the second line of it, where it prints the word the weather network with a link, I'm going to just take that out. I'm probably also going to have to redo it because I think my font isn't showing up. Okay, so that gets rid of the link over here. I'm just going to click back because it's not actually printing. Should be saying Barrie, Ontario. So I'm just going to regenerate it. Maybe for my font, let's make sure there's a blue. Maybe I'll just default the font style to Arial. I'll try it again. So I'm going to copy that. And again, I'm going to take out that link that says the weather network. I'll try it again. So mostly working, although our font, I can see a comma here, but it should be saying Barrie, Ontario. It does link to the Barrie weather. So it does show, but there seems to be a slight problem with their API. It doesn't seem to be quite working right now, because this should be taking us well, it takes us to the weather network, but it doesn't actually show us the name of our city, which it should be. Works for you? Interesting. Well, let's do some cross-browser testing. Well, it's behaving the same way. Anybody else? Is theirs showing, and do you see the city? I'm not sure why I don't see the city on mine. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put this in just a plain HTML file for a minute, just to see if that works. I'm going to make, just as a test, call it weather.html. And I'm going to paste in that code again. I'm curious. If I just load it in a regular HTML file, what happens? Same thing. The city does not show up for mine. Out of curiosity, I'm going to try this one. Maybe I'll try the first format with the square one. I'm curious what's going on. This is basically just a different size. No, same thing. Justin, what browser are you using? Safari. Is anybody else using Safari? Any other Mac users online? You're using Chrome? Chrome. Okay, well, we're sort of partly working. No, Walt, I disagree. Chrome is far too invasive. Google knows everything about you. Interesting, actually, even the widget it generates on the site, okay, it doesn't work for you on Safari. Yeah, it doesn't even work on their site. So this is definitely a bug. This is part of the issue. This is part of the gotcha with APIs. If something goes wrong on the end of the API we're using, we don't necessarily know, and it can break stuff. Huh, that's interesting, Justin. So if, for example, like Google login breaks and we're relying on Google login on our site, all of a sudden people aren't going to be able to log in. So that's the downside, or sometimes APIs get updated. And if an API gets updated, the old API may get changed. This happens often with credit card services. And they'll say, you have to change your code in order to work because we're taking our old API offline. So I'm not going to worry too much about the font for now. Obviously, this is something wrong with... actually, you know what? We're going to try one other thing. Well, even on their site, it doesn't look right. Yeah, I can see the comma on mine. The comma is there, but the city is not getting printed. I'm going to upload it to AWS and see what happens if we try it there. So I'm going to upload the pages I've changed, the header, the footer, and the CSS. And I'm going to give it a try there. That may be why. It may have something to do with that. So let's try an upload. So if I upload my footer, my header, and my CSS, interesting. I was going to check that, Walt, but thanks for checking. Okay, let's see what happens on the live site. So as I mentioned, you no longer have to use the IP address. You can now use lamp.computerstudies in your browser, not via FTP, but in your browser. This will work. Because now it's using HTTPS. And did I upload to the right? I didn't think so, but you never know. I'll be sure to try it again. Okay, so I have my sticky footer. Interesting, doesn't show up at all on AWS. We'll go and try in Chrome. Okay, well, it works live, but still no. So this, I'm going to chalk this up to something wrong with the API. Now, it won't even render in Firefox, and I'm not sure why. Our code is here. Let's try Edge 2. Why not? It's the same thing. So the fact the city isn't, that is a fascinating question, Justin. I guess the Weather Network, you've been very kind to it in a past life, is my best explanation. We'll look at this again before the end of class, but the fact that it's not showing for most of us. Justin, did you make any changes when you created your widget? So on this screen, did you do anything different than what I did? And which options did you choose? Or could you paste the link to your live site if you put it on the server here and we can look at it? If you put it on AWS, that'd be great. We'll have a look and we'll see if there's anything different. Yeah, I'm not sure their page is working great right now. I don't know if this is just my internet connection. Okay, so you're not on AWS. Interesting. So I'm just trying that link. Doesn't seem to load for me. Looks like there's maybe an issue in the footer. When I try to load it, you can probably see my screen. Older generated BTN values. Okay, well, let's try that. So in my footer, you've got 117634. Well, let's see what that does. So it does look like there is a problem with this API right now. I don't actually get anything when I do that. Yeah, so the location should be here, Canada, Ontario, the 00400. That's the code for Barrie. Now it doesn't want to load at all. When I do it in I'm going to put it back to where I had it.
Sorry, it's too long to type out, so I figured I'd just use my mic.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
I noticed that Justin had like multiple locations, so I tried it with multiple locations and the font shows up. It's just when you have a single location.
Really?
It doesn't seem to show up, yeah.
So to add multiple locations, did you just add, would be in this array? So Rebecca, can you post maybe put in the chat your line for the multiple locations?
I just like made the multiple locations like on the widget.
Yep, right.
Like on the Weather Network's website. And the code doesn't look like all that different. Here, I can put it in here though.
Sure.
But yeah, it shows like the arrow and then it shows the font for all of the location, which is so weird.
It is weird. Okay. All right, I'm going to grab that and we'll see what happens. Thank you.
No problem.
Well, this is sort of the fun with programming. Maggie and I had this conversation yesterday. Sometimes you just never know. And you know what? Experimenting, it takes time, but that's how we learn stuff. So I'm going to take that out. See what I get here. So different button, but the same location code. Yeah, totally dead for me in Firefox now. Oh, this is my local. Okay, so it does give me this one. And you've also used the first format. Okay, I'm going to go back and try one more time to put it in the format I want it, but I will try picking 2 locations and see what happens. That's a good tip, Rebecca. I'm going to try again. My page isn't even loading now properly. Wow. I'll try again. This is also why testing in multiple browsers is a really good idea. So I'll try in Chrome. So maybe I'll pick Barrie, and where else is somebody from? Somebody want to give me another city I could put in for your hometown? Okay, you can do Hamilton, sure. Okay, I'm going to leave the defaults again. So now it shows, interestingly enough. So I'll copy from the script tag down to the bottom. And I'll try in both my browsers. Okay, so that's the result I want. I'm actually fine with leaving it down in the center. How does it look in Firefox? I'm not optimistic, but we'll give it a shot. So for some reason, Firefox is kind of dying on me. It doesn't want to show me anything. That's okay. So my API is running in Chrome. It shouldn't be. No, but this is an issue with the API, that the API doesn't render properly. in all browsers. We're going to try it again in Edge. So this looks like it's actually something wrong with the API. I'll also try it in a new Firefox window in a private browser. Okay, so now it works in Edge. Still won't run in Firefox even though my code is here. Oh, here's why. I actually have a tag. I think it's because of this. The JavaScript isn't working in Firefox because I have a broken tag. So the problem is not Firefox, the problem is your instructor. So in my nav bar, I have a UL tag on line 29 that I never closed. So Firefox is probably, in my opinion, correctly not working because of that tag, I think. So I'm going to go fix that. So on my header, yeah, I've never closed this tag. That might have something to do with it. Okay, maybe when we take a break, I'll restart my Firefox. It should work if it's working on Firefox. Obviously, it is silly that we had to pick 2 locations to get it to work. That means the API isn't working quite perfectly. But good for you, Rebecca, for identifying the workaround and sharing that. So my HTML is correct here. I think the issue is my Firefox because I can't even load this page correctly now. So it must just be my Firefox is having a problem. Okay, so there's our first API. I planned on it being a little simpler than that, but that's okay. We worked through it. We got to practice it a little bit more. So what we're going to want to do when we come back, I'm going to take a break shortly, is we're going to want to use we talked about a bunch of Google APIs, and we're going to want to use one of them. And the API we're going to use is this. And for this one, we are going to have to use JSON. So we're going to add reCAPTCHA to our site. There's a few different ways we can do this. And I'm going to want to add reCAPTCHA to our register form. So this will keep spammers and bots from completing our user registration form. There's several different versions of reCAPTCHA. So we're going to look at setting up an API with Google. It's going to involve some work. You're going to need to sign in with your Google account for this. It's going to involve some work in the Google Developer Console, which is good that you get familiar with how that works. And then we're going to set up our reCAPTCHA on our registration page. Yeah, Justin, that's because there are different versions of it. We're going to do it with the I am not a robot quiz, but we'll look at some of the different options that are available to us. There's about 3 or 4 different options we have, and that's why sometimes it looks different on one site from another site. Okay, so I'm going to take a quick pause here. I'm going to step away for a couple of minutes, and I'll also going to restart my Firefox. And why don't we come back around about 10 minutes or so? Does that work? Okay, I will see you guys shortly. I'm going to just stop my screen share and I'll stop the YouTube video.